Hello, and welcome to the Dull Narrator. Today, I will be telling you a story so remarkably uneventful, so impressively ordinary, that it may gently guide your mind into a state of calm, stillness, or perhaps a very pleasant nap. History claims the American Civil War ended in April of 1865. That is when the armies stopped moving. That is when the paperwork was signed. That is when people decided it was over. For Caleb Harlan, the war continued for another 43 years. Caleb was born in 1840 in a river town along the Ohio, a place built on shipping ledgers, muddy boots, and the slow confidence that came from believing the nation would always expand outward and never collapse inward. His father repaired boats. His mother kept records for merchants who could not read well enough to trust themselves. Caleb learned numbers before he learned patience. He learned that names mattered less than totals, that mistakes, when written neatly enough, could survive unquestioned for decades. He was 21 when the war found him, though it had been circling for years. The day Fort Sumter fell, Caleb was standing in a warehouse counting crates of flour bound for Louisville. Someone shouted the news from the street. Someone else laughed. Someone else swore. The crates remained where they were. 2 weeks later, recruiters arrived. Caleb did not rush to join. He did not shout. He did not speak of honor or destiny. He watched men sign their names, some with flourishes they had never practiced before, others with shaky marks that barely resembled letters. When his turn came, he wrote his name cleanly. Caleb Harlan, age 21. Occupation, clerk. The officer nodded. Men like Caleb were useful. He was assigned not to a rifle, but to records. At first, this felt like a blessing. While others marched, Caleb sat at rough tables beneath canvas tents, copying names from one list to another. He logged rations, payroll, equipment. He learned how quickly men disappeared between columns of ink. Transfers, illness, desertion, death. Often there was no difference on paper. By late 1862, Caleb was attached to a supply division moving through Kentucky and Tennessee. He slept poorly. He ate irregularly. He learned to write while exhausted, which is how errors were born. One night, while copying casualty reports after a skirmish near the Cumberland River, Caleb recorded the name Harlan C. among the wounded. It was not him. It was a cavalryman from Indiana with the same surname. Caleb noticed the mistake the following morning. He considered correcting it. He did not. He told himself it would be fixed later, that someone else would notice, that paperwork always corrected itself eventually. It did not. 2 weeks later, another report arrived. Harlan C. Status: killed in action. Caleb stared at the page for a long time. The clerk beside him coughed. The tent flap snapped in the wind. Somewhere outside, men laughed at something that did not involve survival. Caleb could have spoken up. He did not. That afternoon, a replacement clerk arrived. Fresh uniform, nervous hands. Caleb was reassigned. His name moved to a different ledger, but the first ledger remained. From that moment forward, the Union Army officially believed Caleb Harlan was dead and also still working. The contradiction did not bother the system. It happened more often than anyone liked to admit. Caleb continued his duties. He signed receipts. He issued passes. He stamped forms with authority borrowed from ink. He watched men receive letters addressed to soldiers who no longer existed. He watched pay issued to widows whose husbands were still alive and withheld from men who stood 10 feet away. He learned that war was not only fought with bullets, it was fought with columns. In 1863, Caleb was transferred again, this time closer to the front. The work intensified. The nights shortened. Errors multiplied. At Gettysburg, he never saw the main fighting. He saw the aftermath. Wagon loads of paper soaked in rain. Reports smudged beyond recognition. Names lost to water. He rewrote what he could. Sometimes he guessed. Sometimes guessing felt merciful. By 1864, Caleb began to realize something unsettling. Because he was officially dead, he was no longer eligible for reassignment, promotion, or discharge. The war could not release him. Only the living were processed. He tried once to correct the record. The officer he spoke to frowned, flipped through pages, then shook his head. "You're listed elsewhere," the officer said. "Where else?" Caleb asked. The officer closed the ledger. "Not my concern." Caleb learned to stop asking. When the war ended, celebration swept through camps and towns. Bands played. Men hugged. Officers made speeches heavy with meaning. Caleb received no orders. His name did not appear on discharge lists. He was not owed back pay. He was not entitled to transport home. According to the Army, Caleb Harlan had died 2 years earlier. And so, quietly, he walked away. He traveled under no official papers. He worked where no questions were asked. He avoided places that required documentation. He aged without record. Years later, while working for a railroad company that valued efficiency over identity, Caleb discovered something strange. Another man was receiving a pension under his name. The cavalryman from Indiana. The error had continued. Caleb considered revealing the truth. He did not. Instead, he began collecting records, old ledgers, discarded reports, payroll sheets marked corrected without explanation. He noticed patterns, names reused, deaths recorded twice, survivors erased. He realized he was not unique. There were hundreds like him, men who had been counted wrong, men who had lived beyond their paperwork. By the 1890s, Caleb was no longer young. His hands shook slightly when he wrote, but his mind remained sharp. he began assembling a private archive, not for fame, not for justice, but because history, he believed, was becoming too clean, too certain. He titled the final ledger simply, Men Who Did Not Fit. He never published it. He never showed it to historians. When Caleb Harlan died in 1908, his belongings were sold cheaply. The ledger was boxed with old receipts and scrap paper. It passed through several hands before being forgotten entirely. And when historians later calculated the cost of the Civil War, they counted carefully. They counted the dead. They counted the wounded. They counted the missing. They did not count Caleb Harlan. They counted him twice already.